Imagine, just for a second, that you are sitting in a prison cell.
Okay.
And you haven't stolen anything. You haven't hurt anyone. You haven't, organized a riot or anything like that.
Right.
You were sitting in this cell simply because you were deemed by an actual court of law to be, quote-unquote, too educated to not know better.
I mean, that honestly sounds like the premise of a dystopian novel, you know?
Got
Like where the system just weaponizes your own intellect against you as proof that you're guilty.
Yes, exactly. It's wild. But welcome to the Deep Dive. We have a truly mind-bending stack of source materials today, and our mission is to sort of unpack this extraordinary clash between complex scientific rationality on one side and then just rigid institutional power on the other.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case.
It really is. We are looking at official Chinese legal verdicts, a really passionate self-defense document that was actually written from prison, which people often call the blood letter. And this is the craziest part. We're looking at independent legal evaluations of this exact case generated by 6 major AI models.
Right, like we're talking ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, Gemini, Grok, and Quen, all of them.
Yeah, all 6. And just as a quick note to you listening, because these sources do contain some highly politically charged content, involving the Chinese government and various controversial viewpoints, we just want to be super clear right up front that we aren't here to take political sides.
Right, definitely not endorsing any specific ideologies or anything.
Exactly. We are acting purely as an investigative jury, just dissecting the fascinating legal, philosophical, and, well, the scientific logic that's contained inside these documents.
So to get into it, the focus of our analysis today is Dr. Chen Jingyuan. He's a PhD expert in complex systems and physics.
The literal rocket scientist level guy.
Basically, yeah. And over the course of several years, he used a VPN to access Twitter, where he forwarded and saved a handful of posts.
And we should clarify, it was a really small amount, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We are talking about a remarkably small number of interactions. He was primarily just archiving material for his own academic curiosity. But for this activity, Kunming police actually raided his home, and he was ultimately sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison.
Wow.
Yeah. And the crime was, quote, picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Which, I mean, that's a heavy charge. Because to convict someone of that, the prosecution really has to prove a specific chain of events. They have to prove that you knowingly spread false information, and that doing so caused a really serious disruption of public order.
Right.
But what makes this case absolutely fascinating isn't just the arrest itself. It's the incredibly bizarre logic the court used to actually secure the conviction.
Yeah, they laid a trap.
They totally did. A trap based purely on his background.
Which brings us to the core legal hurdle in this whole case, which is the burden of proof regarding a defendant's state of mind.
Yeah, so in criminal law, if the state accuses you of spreading a rumor maliciously, they have to prove mens rea, right? The guilty mind.
Intent. Exactly, the intent. They have to show concrete evidence that you knew the information was false at the exact moment you shared it. Like, if you share an article thinking it's true and it later turns out to be a hoax.
Which happens to everyone.
Right. You obviously lack that malicious intent. So the prosecution, in Dr. Chen's case, had absolutely no evidence of his internal state of mind. They didn't find any messages of him, telling a friend, hey, I know this is a total lie, but I'm going to share it anyway to cause trouble.
So they're looking at a completely blank wall when it comes to what was actually inside his head.
Exactly.
So the court decides to just bypass the need for physical evidence entirely by inventing this crazy cognitive shortcut. They argued that because Dr. Chen possesses a high educational background, specifically, a PhD in the sciences, he automatically possesses an elevated cognitive ability to distinguish right from wrong.
Right, which sounds like a compliment until you hear the rest.
Yeah, because they said since he has that capacity, he must have known the posts were rumors.
And the AI legal analyses across all 6 models uniformly flagged this. They called it a massive structural failure in the court's reasoning. The legal term they actually used is objective imputation, or identity-based guilt.
Objective imputation?
Yeah. The court essentially took a social label, the label of being an intellectual, and just substituted it for hard evidence.
Which is penalizing the capacity rather than the action. I mean, that is like a judge giving you a speeding ticket while your sports car is literally parked in your driveway, and arguing that, well, because you own a high-performance vehicle and you understand how to drive fast, you must have been speeding in your mind.
That's actually a perfect analogy.
It's nuts. The court shifted the entire burden of proof. The state is supposed to prove your guilt, but by, weaponizing his PhD, The court essentially told Dr. Chen, hey, prove to us why your big brain didn't automatically know this was a rumor.
Yeah, it creates this impossible legal paradox where your defining positive trait becomes the inescapable proof of your criminality. So the real question becomes, how do you even dismantle an identity trap like that?
Right. And for Dr. Chen, the answer was to just lean entirely into that intellectual identity. In his blood letter, the one he wrote from prison, he realized that fighting the court on their own terms was just a losing battle.
Because he'd just be spinning his wheels.
Exactly. He didn't waste time debating the factual accuracy of, like, a cartoon depicting Donald Trump and Xi Jinping or some opinion piece on the Huawei chip ban.
Because arguing the specific facts of those posts inside a closed system, it just validates the system's premise to begin with.
Right.
So instead of arguing about the posts themselves, he zooms way, way out to the fundamental nature of truth itself, which is amazing. He builds his first line of defense on epistemology, which is the philosophy of knowledge.
Yeah, he brings out some incredibly heavy philosophical tools to establish what his actual documented state of mind is. He begins with Plato's allegory of the cave.
Okay, so take us back to College Philosophy 101 for a second. The cave. Right, so the allegory basically suggests that human beings are like prisoners chained inside a cave, and we're just watching shadows dance on a wall in front of us. We only ever perceive approximations of reality, never the absolute truth itself.
Okay.
And Dr. Chen applied this to his consumption of social media. He argued that scrolling through Twitter is essentially just watching shadows on the cave wall.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Isn't it? You are seeing fragments, opinions, perspectives. You aren't seeing absolute truth.
I mean, think about the last time you retweeted or bookmarked an article you hadn't fully fact-checked. Were you maliciously spreading a lie? Or were you just, bookmarking an interesting shadow on the wall to examine later?
Exactly. He is framing his interaction with the platform not as a broadcaster of truth, but just as an observer of phenomena.
And then he reinforces that with a math concept, right?
Yeah.
Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Yes. This is a foundational theorem proving that any sufficiently complex logical system is always going to contain statements that are true, but literally cannot be mathematically proven within that same system.
So mathematics itself is inherently incomplete.
Essentially, yes. So Dr. Chen argued that if we cannot even achieve absolute provable certainty in pure hard mathematics, it is completely absurd to demand that a citizen possess absolute certainty about the chaotic, murky realms of politics or social theory.
Wait, I love this. So because the prosecution built their entire case on the assumption that a quote-unquote smart person automatically possesses absolute certainty about what is true and false, Chen is using Gödel to prove that a rigorous scientist's default mental state is actually the exact opposite.
Exactly.
His default state is persistent doubt and skepticism.
And the AI models found this argument strategically brilliant. The prosecution claimed his state of mind was malicious certainty, but Chen mathematically and philosophically proved that his state of mind was one of academic curiosity and structural doubt.
Right.
And legally speaking, if your internal state is one of inquiry, you mathematically cannot have the malicious intent required to, pick quarrels and provoke trouble.
Right, but I can totally see a skeptic listening to this and thinking, well, that is an amazing philosophical flex, sure. But if I tell a criminal court judge that I shouldn't be penalized because absolute truth doesn't exist and the universe is just shadows, I am absolutely still going to jail.
Yeah.
It just feels a bit abstract for a local court.
Well, it's funny you say that because the AI evaluations actually acknowledged that exact hesitation. Several of the models noted that practical, everyday courts operate on basic legal standards, not ultimate philosophical truths. A local judge is not sitting there pondering Plato.
Yeah, exactly. They've got a docket to get through.
Right. However, the models concluded that while a judge might find the language overly academic, the underlying legal mechanism of the defense is totally flawless.
Because it attacks the core assumption.
Yes. It successfully attacks the single load-bearing pillar of the prosecution's case, which is the presumption of his intent. By proving his intent was curiosity, the whole guilty mind requirement just collapses.
Okay, so philosophy handles the internal intent part of it. But it doesn't solve the whole equation, because the charge of picking quarrels also requires the state to prove external physical harm, right?
That's right.
They had to prove his actions caused a serious disruption of public order. And this is where Chen pivots from the abstract philosophy of the mind to the hard, undeniable mathematics of the physical world.
And this is his specialty. He moves to complex system dynamics, which is his actual field of physics.
Right.
So the state is essentially claiming he caused a systemic event, like a ripple effect that led to a breakdown of society or some huge public panic. To dismantle this, Dr. Chen actually mapped his own social network to demonstrate the objective outcome of his actions.
So he didn't just stand up and say, hey, I didn't cause a riot. He literally brought the receipts of network theory to prove he physically couldn't have caused one.
Exactly. He utilized concepts like scale-free networks and Cohen's critical threshold. Basically, in network dynamics, a system is made up of nodes. A massive influencer with millions of followers, they are a central hub node.
Right, they tweet something and millions see it.
Exactly. But Dr. Chen pointed out the objective metrics of his Twitter account. He had fewer than 100 followers, and his saved posts had near zero engagement. So in the terminology of complex systems, he wasn't a hub, he was an edge node.
Okay, so to visualize an edge node, it's kind of like trying to start a massive continent-spanning forest fire, but your specific tree is standing completely alone in the middle of a 10-mile concrete parking lot.
Yes.
Like, you can light that tree on fire all you want, but mathematically the fire has literally nowhere to jump. The physical environment just does not allow for a systemic event.
That's a great way to picture it. And the AI models were particularly impressed by his use of the Galton-Watson extinction theorem and avalanche dynamics to prove this point.
Oh, avalanche dynamics.
Yeah, it's like an epidemiology, right? When you track how a virus spreads through an office building, you look at the branching number or the R-naught.
Oh, right. Like during the pandemic, everyone learned about R-naught.
Exactly. If the R-naught is above 1, the virus spreads exponentially and you get a huge outbreak. But if the R-naught is below 1, the virus just naturally dies out.
And the same math applies to information spreading on a social network.
Completely. Dr. Chen demonstrated that his average branching number was way, way below 1 because his posts were essentially hitting a dead end in that concrete parking lot. The mathematical probability of his actions causing a systemic avalanche, which the court defined as a serious disruption of public order, approached 0.
Wow. So he didn't just argue that he was harmless. He provided the literal mathematical proof that an edge node with zero engagement cannot trigger a systemic phase transition.
Right.
The physics simply do not allow for it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a watertight defense. He used epistemology to prove his internal innocence, and he used physics to prove his external harmlessness.
It's pretty amazing.
It is. But that actually leads us to a really frustrating realization, because we know he was sentenced to nearly 2 years in prison. So what actually happened when he presented this flawless logic to the court? Did they just not get it?
Well, the AI analyses identified this as the tragedy of a profound systemic mismatch. Dr. Chen was speaking the language of science, probability, and rigorous logic. He presented a mathematically sound defense. But the judicial system he was facing wasn't built to process probability or scientific truth.
Right.
It was a machine built on political labeling and authoritative verdicts.
So the institution didn't need to refute his network dynamics or debate his branching numbers.
No, not at all.
Because when raw institutional power meets scientific rationality, the power doesn't engage with the science, it just enforces its will. So the court completely ignored the math and just reiterated their original stance.
Yeah, they basically just pushed right past it, which pushed Dr. Chen to the final and really most biting argument in his bloodletter, which is the concept of reductio ad absurdum.
Reducing the court's logic to absurdity.
Exactly. He realized that if his math wasn't going to save him, he needed to expose the terrifying implications of the court's ruling.
He pointed out the obvious domino effect. I mean, if reading dissenting opinions, saving controversial theories, and just possessing a skeptical mind is a crime simply because you have a high educational background,
then everyone is guilty.
Right. The logical conclusion is that every single scholar, researcher, and thinker in the entire country is a criminal.
He laid bare the reality that the court was literally criminalizing the cognitive process itself. They weren't prosecuting a physical crime, they were prosecuting the act of doing academic research.
Which is terrifying.
It really is. And this is where the perspective of those 6 AI models becomes absolutely crucial to our understanding of the case.
Right, because we have ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, Gemini, Grok, and Quen. These are models trained by totally different companies, right?
Yeah.
Under completely different regulatory environments with different training data. Some are Western models, some are Chinese models. And they were all fed the court documents and the blood letter. So how did they process the logic of this systemic mismatch?
The consensus was staggering, honestly. Every single one of the 6 AI models operating totally independently arrived at the exact same conclusion.
Wait, really? All six.
All six of them. They evaluated the court's reliance on objective imputation, they analyzed Chen's epistemological defense, they verified his network physics, and they universally concluded that the court's logic was fundamentally broken.
So they all saw right through the whole too-educated trap.
Yes. The models identified the conviction as a severe misapplication of the law and a violation of fundamental constitutional principles regarding the burden of proof. But, and this is the really interesting part, the AIs went a step further in their analysis of the complex system dynamics.
Oh, how so?
They noted that if you are genuinely looking for the root cause of public disorder or systemic instability, you really shouldn't be looking at Dr. Chen's isolated little Twitter account.
Oh, wow. Let me guess. The real threat to the system is the system itself.
Exactly. The AI models concluded that the judicial system's arbitrary abuse of power was the actual destabilizing force. By punishing intellectual inquiry, abandoning evidence-based justice, and ruling through these massive logical fallacies, the institution degrades the trust that's required for a society to function.
So the institution actually becomes the source of the avalanche.
Perfectly said, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So bring this all back to you, the listener. Why does a deep dive into an obscure court case in Kunming matter for your daily life?
Yeah.
I think it serves as a masterclass in how to dismantle flawed logic.
Definitely.
Dr. Chen showed us how cross-disciplinary thinking, blending the philosophy of knowledge with the hard mathematics of network physics, can be used as a vital defense mechanism against arbitrary power. It just highlights the stark, terrifying contrast between an open, questioning mind that constantly seeks evidence and a closed, dogmatic system that literally refuses to look at the math.
It reminds us that critical thinking isn't just some theoretical academic exercise. In a world that is increasingly saturated with information, labels, and authoritative claims, your ability to question the underlying logic of a system is your primary defense against being swept up in it.
Absolutely. And we want to leave you with a final, really provocative thought to mull over, something that the source material points toward, even if it doesn't state it outright.
Yeah, so just consider the dynamics of what we just explored today. We watched 6 different highly advanced artificial intelligence models unanimously defend human rationality.
Right.
They defended the rigorous logic of a single human being against the bias and political pressure of a human institution. They cut through all the noise to identify objective, legal, and scientific truths.
Which opens up a fascinating, albeit, slightly unsettling question about our future. As human justice systems inevitably face the pressures of political bias, authoritative overreach, or just plain flawed logic, could artificial intelligence eventually become the ultimate, uncorruptible archivist of objective truth and legal fairness?
It's a huge question.
Right. Like, if humans cannot be trusted to objectively evaluate the math, will we eventually have to rely on the machine to protect the nuances of the human mind?
It presents a really compelling paradox. We often fear AI as this tool of dystopian control, but in a scenario where institutions criminalize intellect, the machine might be the only entity capable of perfectly defending it.
Because at the end of the day, no one should have to fear being locked in a prison cell simply because they had the capacity to understand the world a little too deeply.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the logic of the systems around you, and we'll see you next time.